We thought February of 2020 delivered the threat of a lifetime, and then came February of 2022, and this new threat that could spread far beyond Ukraine.
Putin's action betrays sinister vision for the future of our world.
He's not going to stop with Ukraine.
And then you see Poland and Romania and all of those countries.
That's where you start to think about World War III.
Because Vladimir Putin's deceptive arguments for invading Ukraine also apply to at least 3 of our NATO allies, which we're obligated to defend. And knowing that he could not win a war against the collective forces of NATO, Putin said if we try to stop him from taking what he wants, he'll launch his nuclear missiles and destroy the world.
Победителей не будет.
And while we hope that he's bluffing on that, remember who we're dealing with.
One thing about Putin doesn't bluff, which is unfortunate.
And while Putin blitzed Ukraine, we also have to remember his fellow autocrat in China wants to take Taiwan. And they've signed a new pact which states there are no forbidden areas of cooperation, while other tyrants already aligned with Russia and already aligned with China would be eager to follow their lead. This is what the tyrants are now calling the new order of the world, and this is now the new challenge of our time. This is a global clash now between the autocrats on one side and free nations on the other. And there are 3 important things we need to remember. Number 1, don't be surprised when you see even more disinformation and instability and chaos and disorder. That's exactly how the autocrats stoke fear and sell their promises of restoring order to draw and hold their power. Number 2, do not be surprised if you see throngs of Americans embracing or sympathizing with the autocrats. It always happens that way. It happened after Hitler's rise to power, right here in the United States. Look at this. These are some jarring reminders from the National Archives of how many Americans in the late 1930s rallied for the Nazis. This rally at Madison Square Garden drew more than 20,000. Take a look at these old films from that same era. You see American summer camps in which the children raise the Nazi flag. The autocrats back then were good at persuading people who didn't have all the facts. Now consider what autocrats can do today with so many people's perceptions and knowledge drawn from whatever they're fed by algorithms on social media. But that leads us to point number 3, because as grim as it sounds, we can still work through this and prevail in the end. Greed and the desire for power are just inherent flaws in humanity that will always pull the world toward conquest and tyranny and war, and always have delivered mountains of evil. But as Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said, there is also a creative force in this universe that works to pull down those gigantic mountains of evil. And that's why he said the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. So as we face a threat that may continue to spread through invasion or try to take root from within, just keep in mind Dr. King was telling us the moral arc of the universe bends toward justice, but it does not bend by itself. We have to keep working together to push it that way, to overcome the bullies of his time and now the bullies of ours.
In the battle between democracy and autocracies, democracies are rising to the moment. Now is the hour. Our moment of responsibility, our test of resolve and conscience, of history itself. It is in this moment that our character of this generation is formed.
That's Russian warplanes striking a cluster of apartments next to a hospital and people lined up for medicine at a pharmacy.
It's like a hell. We don't know what to do.
And the United States and NATO say Russia has accelerated its use of cluster bombs, the weapon of choice to massacre civilians. See, these things ignite before a striking ground to spread more fire and spray more shrapnel the length of several football fields to kill, maim, and burn people. But many of the people of Russia may have no idea any of this is happening because Vladimir Putin controls the flow of news in Russia. And he just dissolved the remnants of what independent media there still was. And he is selling his invasion to the Russian people by feeding them the following 3 big lies. Lie number 1 is that the United States somehow controls Ukraine and installed neo-Nazis to run it because the United States wants to make heroes out of the people who fought on the side of Hitler.
We are fighting against neo-Nazis. Neo-Nazis, the neo-Nazi units. Neo-Nazis opened fire.
Lie number 2 is that the neo-Nazis the United States installed to honor Hitler in Ukraine are now brutalizing and holding the Ukrainian people hostage.
Neo-Nazis who were torturing. Neo-Nazis treat their own population even worse, who they were inhuman to the local population.
And lie number 3 is that the neo-Nazis the United States installed in Ukraine to honor Hitler are now threatening to attack Russia with nuclear weapons.
Threaten us with nuclear weapons as well, as it was happening recently.
And should any Russians see any signs that the Ukrainian people are resisting the Russian occupation, here's how Putin explains that.
Brainwashed by the Nazi propaganda.
Well, Senator Marco Rubio said, "I wished I could share more, but for now I can say it's pretty obvious to many that something is off with Putin." That "wish I could share more" part appears to be a reference to his access to classified intel on Putin. In terms of what is public, in 2008, we do know the Pentagon determined Vladimir Putin has what it calls a neurological abnormality. And he's attacked hospitals and schools for years and has had a hand in massacring civilians from Grozny to Aleppo. But as Putin blows up and burns civilians in Ukraine, our foreign policy and intelligence experts see something more than the tyrannical killer they've come to know.
He was always calculating and cold, but this is different. He seems erratic.
And isolated. Notice the meetings with his own team take place across a super long table, just as they do with his foes. Putin reportedly withdrew from others a couple of years ago to avoid getting COVID-19. And as an autocrat, his inner circle is not inclined to challenge him much anyway. A former U.S. ambassador to Russia, Michael McFaul, states he's watched and listened to Putin for over 30 years. And he has changed, that he sounds completely disconnected from reality, and that he sounds unhinged. And that brings us back to Putin's threat to start a nuclear war if NATO ever tries to stop him. And to those who say that it makes no sense for Putin to destroy the world because he'd be destroyed too, consider a sociopath lacks conscience, and that Putin might think a world in which he does not prevail is not a world worth existing.
He thinks like someone who wants to be a great historic figure like Catherine the Great in Russian lore.
So in summary, we're dealing with a tyrant who our government believes has a neurological problem, who has delusions of grandeur, with a long history of massacring civilians, who created a make-believe world of Nazis with nukes to invade another country, with broader interest in taking much more than Eastern Europe, who insists he'll destroy the world if we try to stop him, who happens to have the power to do it with the world's largest nuclear arsenal. If we push him too hard, he could feel cornered and then lash out by invading more than Ukraine or using chemical, biological, or nuclear weapons. Or not push hard enough, and he could feel emboldened to invade more than Ukraine and maybe use chemical, biological, or nuclear weapons. We judge Lincoln, FDR, and JFK as greats by how they dealt with dire challenges to our nation in the 19th and 20th centuries. And here we are now at another flashpoint in history in which we will all be judged by how we respond to this challenge of the 21st century.